Hi, it's Wayne from CES, and it's great to have Wayne Facer from Education Enterprise here today. We're going to talk about the dark art of bank staffing. Tell me, Wayne, what is bank staffing?
Bank staffing was created for schools to manage their staffing about 15 years ago, and from what I can see from my perspective, bank staffing is underutilised by about $50 million a year. So my job nationwide has been supporting schools to utilise that, exploit the loopholes in bank staffing, and for schools to get what they're entitled to, so as our pupils throughout New Zealand can continue to get a better education.
Right, and obviously there's some important dates around bank staffing. Can you tell me what they are and actually what they mean?
Yes, the 1st of March roll return confirms a school's staffing. It does not reduce staffing. It's we fact there for people to know, and then again from there you after that have the 1st of July, which basically is your roll return again, and that continues to dictate future ops grants, and of course the 1st of July dictates next year's staffing, and that's quite an important time, is to be utilising all your skills around role growth and predictions there to get that as right as possible. Then from there, about mid-September, you get your confirmed staffing, which might either be good news or bad news. If it's not what you expect, you can then do a roll review by the middle of October, or pretty much soon after you get your provisional roll return. And then from there, very importantly, is another time frame in the middle of November for you to be filling in your extraordinary roll growth, which is a bit of a misnomer, because that phrase and name can scare schools off, but it is worthwhile doing that, particularly if your role has increased since the 1st of July, because this extraordinary role growth form that needs to be completed mid-November gives you more ops grants for the increased role that you have had. So that's quite important for schools to know, and that basically from my perspective, I've seen schools get about $5 million a year from having filled in that form, because it's not commonly known about.
Yep. And I understand that the word overuse is one that schools perhaps don't necessarily want to hear, because it has financial implications for those schools. Can you explain that further?
Yes, it can. If you're in an overuse situation, the ministry then takes that off you in a dollar value, pretty much at the top teacher rate, and currently the overuse rate's about $72,000 a year. So a number of schools get to, say, September, October in overuse at the government's cost, and the trick is to tidy that up before it gets taken off you at that higher rate. And there's a number of ways that you can do that through, if your role is increasing and increased staffing, or you may have to flick a cheaper teacher to bulk grant, or you may be able to juggle your relievers either to bulk grant to make that work as well.
And conversely, obviously, the underuse situation obviously has implications as well. Can you tell me more about that?
Yes, the underuse is quite cunning from the ministry, because they then refund you an underuse at the $55,000 rate, which is less than the relieving rate. So I encourage schools, if they can, to maximise that usage within the school as much as possible, employing more teachers, providing more education for the pupils, using more relieving days, etc., because there's a big gap between what the government takes off you in overuse and what they pay back in underuse.
Some implications there. Just some buzzwords here I see: additional hours, code, advantages. Tell me about that.
Yes, if you have a fixed termer at your school, it's very advantageous if they're on a higher salary than the relieving rate to pay them their relieving days as additional hours, and it's important to do that through teacher's salary. And it usually means if the teacher's at the top of the scale and you pay them additional hours code, they can then get paid $380 a day compared to $315 a day if they're getting paid as a relieving day. So that can make a big difference when it comes to Christmas time, etc. And of course those people getting paid a wee bit more. So, yeah.
And tell me about leave without pay implications as far as bank staffing is concerned.
Yes, leave without pay. If a teacher has leave without pay, which is usually in most cases just a few days here and there, it basically costs the school $150 a day in additional bank staffing usage, as well as that teacher getting docked their pay. So it's important to know about the ins and outs of that and be aware of that and discuss it with staff and potentially discuss it with board and change your policy around who grants that leave without pay, whether it's the principal or the board of trustees, etc. Yes.
Okay. And 0.01 fixed term advantages, what's the situation there?
That's a wee bit around the additional hours as well. You can appoint a person at your school at 0.01. It means they owe you 2 relieving days throughout the year. It's quite advantageous if the teacher's on a higher salary rate than the reliever's rate, and it means you can then, after they've done those first 2 days, pay their relieving days as additional hours for each of those days, and they get paid $380 a day compared to $315, and then you become their favourite principal and favourite school to work at. Yes, so it's quite important to know that.
Okay. Wayne, you've been involved in helping schools right through New Zealand actually as far as bank staffing and other areas with respect to your areas of expertise as a former principal of a school, of course. What other worthwhile tips have you got that can help?
Oh, there's a number of tips, but there are a few here. If you're in an underuse situation, you can only get refunded up to a maximum of 10% underuse. So if you've got a $300,000 credit, say for example, and that's 30% credit, you're only going to get $100,000 back. That's a very extreme situation, but it is pertinent to know that, so then you aren't expecting a $300,000 payout and only get 100 and go, hey, what's happened here? Sometimes you're only talking tens of thousands, but it makes a difference. The ministry don't ring you and say, hey, you've got to use all this up in a hurry, or very rarely they do. So it's worthwhile to know that so as you can plan ahead, employ more staff, more relievers, etc., and more programs within your school, so as you don't lose anything and you get refunded back at least what you can maximally get back, if that's a word.
Okay.
So it's important to know if you have a teacher that's on maternity grant and going on maternity grant, if that you've got that teacher on the bulk grant, it's very important that you get that teacher across the teacher's salary before they go off and claim their maternity grant, so as if it's on teacher's salary, it's paid by the government, whereas if you leave that person on bulk grant, you as a school get stung that $8,000 out of your bulk grant, which can be a nasty surprise and a very difficult conversation to have with your board of trustees around that. Another tip there, it's very important to know that sick leave claims, you only have 1 term's grace. So if you have a principal or a teacher who's off for a period of time, more than 8 days, the first 8 days the school pays. Once you are trying to claim for these things, there's only a 1-term grace period that you can apply for, so you don't want to miss out on a term's worth of sick leave that you could have been reimbursed that the school has already paid for. And one last tip, it's very important to know that you have to apply for role growth staffing. And for U4 schools and above, such as schools 170 odd above enrolled, the rule of thumb is every 3 pupils is worth another 0.1 in staffing. But for those smaller schools, there are various trigger points to extra staffing, which you can play with on the ministry staffing calculator. But it's very important to know that you have to be proactive and apply for that. It doesn't come automatically. And in my opinion, that's where $10 to $20 million a year of staffing is lost by schools, because they don't know that they need to apply for it, because they think, as you would, that it comes automatically once you put it through their role in the office. That's not the case. It's very important to be proactive in applying for staffing that you're entitled to, so as you can predict a slot in extra teachers or staff and to do the best for your school.
Great, that's fantastic. Look, thanks Wayne for coming in. So it's Wayne from CES, and it's been great to have Wayne Facer from Education Enterprises here today. If your school needs any assistance with respect to bank staffing, don't be afraid to call them. The details are underneath. Cheers.